January, and I'm reading Travels with My Aunt. It's a novel by Greene, published in 1969, and it's about him meeting his Aunt Augusta again after 50 years at his mother's funeral. Henry is a retired bank manager, and his Aunt Augusta is a traveller. They travelled together to Istanbul and Boulogne. This is now part 2, chapter 1. While the ship was tucked out into the yellow tidal rush, and the untidy skyscrapers and the castellated customs house jerked away as though they than the ship were at the end of the road, I thought of that distant day's depression and of how wrong my fears had proved. It was 8 on a July morning, and the seabirds wailed like the cats in Latimer Road, and the clouds were heavy with coming rain. There was one break of sunlight over La Plata, which gave the dull river a single silver streak. But the brightest spot in the sombre scape of water and shore was the flames from gas pipes flapping against the black sky. There were 4 days ahead of me, up the Plata de Paraná and the Paraguay before I joined my aunt, and I left the Argentine winter for my overheated cabin and began to hang up my clothes and arrange my books and papers into a semblance of home. More than half a year passed after my encounter with the detectives before I received any news of my aunt. I had become convinced of her death by that time, and once in a dream I was badly frightened by a creature crawling across the floor towards me with broken legs, which swung like a snake's tail. It was going to pull me down within reach of its teeth, and I was paralyzed with terror like a bird before a snake. When I awoke, I remembered Mr. Visconti, though I believe it is a cobra and not a viper which is supposed to paralyze birds. During that empty time I received one more letter from Miss Keene. She wrote in her own hand, for a clumsy servant had broken the keyboard of her typewriter. I was just going to write, she said, how stupid and clumsy these blacks are, and then I remembered how you and my father had discussed racialism one night at dinner, and I felt as though I was betraying our old house in Southwood and the companionship of those days. Sometimes I fear that I'm going to be quite assimilated. In Coffee Fontaine, the Prime Minister no longer seems the monster we thought him at home. Indeed, he's criticized here sometimes as an old-fashioned liberal. I find myself, when I meet a tourist from England, explaining apartheid so convincingly. I don't want to be assimilated, yet I am to make my life here. The broken sentence sounded like an appeal which she was too shy to make clear. There followed the gossip of the farm, a dinner party to neighbours who lived more than 100 miles away, and then one paragraph which I found a little disturbing. I have met a Mr. Hughes, a land surveyor, and he wants to marry me. Please don't laugh at me. He's a kind man in his late 50s, a widower with a teenage daughter whom I like well enough. I don't know what to do. It would be the final assimilation, wouldn't it? I've always had a silly dream of one day coming back to Southwood and finding the old house empty. How I miss that dark rhododendron walk. And beginning my life all over again. I'm afraid of talking to anyone here about Mr. Hughes. They would all be too encouraging. I wish you were not so far away, for I know you would counsel me wisely. Was I wrong to read an appeal in the last sentence, a desperate appeal in spite of its calm wording, an appeal for some decisive telegram? Come back to Southwood and marry me? Who knows whether I might not have sent one in my loneliness if a letter had not arrived which drove poor Miss Keene right out of my mind. It was from my aunt, written on stiff aristocratic notepaper. bearing simply a scarlet rose and the name Lancaster, with no address, like the title of a noble family. Only when I read a little way into the letter did I realize that Lancaster was the name of an hotel. My aunt made no appeal. She simply issued a command, and there was no explanation of her long silence. I have decided, she wrote, not to return to Europe, and I'm giving up my apartment over the Crown and Anchor at the end of the next quarter. I would be glad if you would pack what clothes there may be there, and dispose of all the furniture. On second thoughts, however, keep the photograph of Freetown Harbour for me as a memento of dear Wordsworth, and bring it with you. She had not even told me where to come at that point of the letter, or asked me if it were possible. Preserve it in its frame, which has great sentimental value because it was given me by Mr. V. I enclose a cheque on my account at the Credit Suisse, Bern, which will be sufficient for a first-class ticket to Buenos Aires. Come as soon as you can, for I get no younger. I do not suffer from gout, like an old friend whom I met the other day on a packet boat, but I feel, nonetheless, a certain stiffness in the joints. I want very much to have with me a member of my family whom I can trust in this rather bizarre country, not the less bizarre for having a shop called Harrods around the corner from the hotel, though it is less well stocked, I fear, than in the Brompton Road. I telegraphed to Miss Keene, joining my aunt in Buenos Aires shortly. Will write, and set about selling the furniture. The Venetian glass, I'm afraid, went for a song. When all was sold at Harrods auction rooms, I had some dispute with the landlord of the Crown and Anchor over the sofa on the landing. I received enough for my return ticket and £50 in traveller's cheques, so I did not cash my aunt's draft on the Swiss bank, and I paid the little what was over into my own account, for I thought it better for her to have no assets in England if she planned not to return. But as for joining my aunt in Buenos Aires, my forecast had been too optimistic. There was no one to meet me at the airport, and when I arrived at the Lancaster Hotel, I found only my room reserved and a letter. I'm sorry not to be here to greet you, she wrote, but I have had to move on urgently to Paraguay, where an old friend of mine is in some distress. I have left you a ticket for the riverboat, for reasons too complicated to explain now. I do not wish you to take a plane to Asunción. I cannot give you an address, but I will see you are met. It was a highly unsatisfactory arrangement, but what could I do? I hadn't sufficient funds to stay in Buenos Aires until I heard from her again, and I felt it impossible to return to England when I had travelled so far on her money. But I took the precaution of changing her single ticket to Asunción into a return. And I stop this here for now and continue soon.